that's okay. Okay. I'm not going to start over again. Let's begin. I would just like to ask a question that I think should be being asked a lot more than it has been by adults and certainly by policymakers. And that is, what's it been like for children? Let's just say this country. What's it been like for children in this country during the past year or 18 months? Anybody? Anybody ever thought about that? You know, have they suffered? You think? You think children have suffered? In what ways have they suffered? Yes.
Lack of social contact.
Lack of social contact with peers. Yes. Thanks, Mel.
So in the way of going to school, education.
Yeah, there's education suffered. A lot of parents will tell you that they're
Friends from school.
away from school activities, extracurricular sports and things. Parents will say that their children are now behind in reading or in whatever it is that they're studying. It's interesting because throughout the pandemic, up until relatively recently, it was assumed that children were more or less immune. I have a theory that if children were just as susceptible to the virus early on, that their parents wouldn't have acted in such reprehensible ways in terms of attacking the capitals and various other things, because they'd be worried about bringing the virus back home to their kids. It's just, maybe that's giving grown-ups too much credit. But I think that there's things have been affected by the pandemic in ways that we really don't understand. But is it fair to say children have been harmed, do you think, during the pandemic? Depends. It does depend on socioeconomic status. Have they been harmed by choices that have been made by them or for them by other people? Well, I don't know of any instance, to be honest, this might come up later too, where any decisions made about school closings involve children at all. Parents were involved, PTAs were involved, adults were involved generally. Children were never consulted. Interesting.
I think there was an instability of patterns that really upset them.
Yeah, and I think that
they didn't know what to depend on anymore.
Yeah, and children,
change.
if you have children or no children, you know that need for routine is very real. And when it just sort of disappears, there's mental instability that happens in many cases. And I've been reading more and more about mental illness in children throughout the pandemic. So I would say that there has been harm. So we'll see in a little bit that harms are related to rights. Harms are what give rise to rights. Rights are what protect us from harms. So if children have been harmed during the pandemic, does that mean their rights have been violated?
First off, I don't think the harm.
I think that it's possible that the harms, if they did happen, were unintentional. It was a unique situation for which there isn't a lot of precedent that even most adults have lived through. So, of course, it doesn't necessarily to have your rights violated doesn't necessarily mean that it had to have been intentional. When we talk about other rights, if they've been violated even unintentionally, you still have a claim to say that they've been violated. Can they sue somebody, children, if they've been harmed, their rights have been violated? Well, it depends on whether children have rights. Do they? That's the question. Do children have human rights? One of the reviewers of my book said, in this book, Hiskis makes the controversial and radical claim that children are human beings. I wish I'd written that. That's so good. But it's true. And it's what I'm going to argue today as well, that the purpose in this book and in my talk today is to argue that children are fully human creatures and therefore should be given full human rights. Part of doing that will accomplish a few other goals too. It's my purpose to illuminate some of those goals. First of all, if we can prove that children have human rights, that will provide, it will require and provide a new, more accurate picture of why humans have human rights in the first place. What is it that is special about us that grants us these precious things that we call rights? If we ask whether children have them, we have to answer that question, and it'll be a different answer. Secondly, it will show that even more than adults, children manifest that thing or those things that specially entitle us as human beings to rights. And so obviously, they should be given rights too. And I'm not just talking about human rights. Americans aren't always all that clear what human rights are, to be perfectly honest. I'm going to include citizenship rights as well. There's a spoiler alert here. I am going to argue that children should get to vote later on. So you can start your questions, writing your questions now. The third thing that will happen is that if I can show that children fully have human rights, that will necessitate a change in the priority of human rights. There's several different kinds of human rights: political rights, legal rights, rights of the person, that involves torture and so forth. And then there's socioeconomic rights, which are sometimes called second generation or third generation rights. Sometimes they're ridiculed as not really being rights. Healthcare is not really a right. Paid vacation isn't really a right. These things are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but not everybody thinks that those are the most important rights. If we give children full human rights, it's going to change that order rather dramatically. Finally, I think that if we give children full human rights, including citizenship rights, that will affect democracy. That will affect democratic practices. And I think will reinvigorate our democracy and democracies around the world in a way that usually happens when the franchise is extended to a new group of people. But I want us to think a little bit about what it would mean if children got rights in terms of what kind of civic education would need to take place at home, in schools, through town. It could be quite an extraordinary set of efforts. So let's start with the question of why is it even necessary to make an argument? To establish a theoretical foundation, is how I pretentiously say it in the cover of the book, for the human rights of children. Why do we even have to make this argument? I'd say there's two reasons. The first one has some statistics. Sorry, I'm a social scientist. I have to give some statistics here. Every nation in the world has ratified the 1989-1990 document called the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's a UN convention, lists 30 rights that children have, except one nation. Anybody know which nation that might be? The United States. Yes, we're the only, we'll talk about that in a minute. But still, if every other nation has, how could it be the case that 150 million children in the world still live in forced labor situations? 150 million, that's a country. Maybe that's the point, because it's not a country, nobody pays attention. 10 million of the 40 million slaves that still exist in the world today, including in the United States, are under 15 years of age. 10 million child slaves. Speaking of the United States, in the United States, 21% of children in the United States live below the poverty line and therefore experience every single day food scarcity. 21% in this country. And we're not the worst. We're 34th, though, from being the best. We're number 34 in terms of child welfare. This is one of the reasons. Now, I will say that this 21% figure has been cut in half by the emergency funding that was passed by Congress under President Biden last year, because it started the children's tax credit, which deposits money into the bank on a monthly basis for all children living below the poverty line. And that one step cut child poverty in half in this country, but it's part of the Build Back Better plan, which if it doesn't pass, that will disappear. And those 11.5% of American children who were finally getting enough food will go back to not having enough food. So there's some pretty horrifying statistics. I think there's more, but I think that's probably enough. The second reason why we have to talk about this is because there has never been a theoretical foundation. There's never been an argument. There's never been a theory about human rights that includes children. The 17th century, 16th, 17th century theory of rights that we know of by Jefferson and Washington and Tom Paine and all the people who wrote the things that are behind our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, specifically exclude women, explicitly exclude children as right holders, and women too, of course, but specifically exclude children. And we need to see why that is. Once we understand why that is, we'll understand why the definition of rights is going to have to change if we're going to give them to children. Let's talk a little bit about, just because I think this is so current right now, even in terms of the elections that happened yesterday. Talk a little bit about the relationship of the United States to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So we are the only nation that never ratified it. Bill Clinton did sign it, but it doesn't become American law unless it's ratified by the Senate. Every other nation has ratified it, which means that it's law, it's domestic law in those countries. It's not domestic law in this country. So why did we reject it? Why would we still be the only nation on earth that doesn't officially believe that children have rights? You know, I actually wrote the Trump administration back when at the border there was discovered that they were putting children in cages. And I thought, what you guys need to do right now is make the Senate ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It'd be a huge public relations boon for you if you did it. And well, I never heard back, but I think it would have been a good idea with some interesting historical president in the Reagan administration you can ask me about during the Q&A. But the first reason was because the Convention on the Rights of the Child, I'm going to use CRC as that, it's not the Christian Reformed Church, it's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, required that signatory nations could no longer execute criminals, those convicted of capital crimes, if they were under 18 years old. We weren't going to give that up. So that was the first reason that was brought up in the Senate, probably by a Texas senator, I'm not sure, but about why we can't sign this. The Supreme Court ended up deciding that it was unconstitutional to execute minors a few years later. So that's not the real reason. The real reason still has something to do with the rights of parents. Anybody heard anything about the rights of parents lately? I mean, the election yesterday is very interesting on this score. Let's talk about that a little bit, because people who dislike the Convention on the Rights of the Child say it conflates parents' rights with children's rights. Do parents have rights? Do parents have rights as parents that other adults who are not parents don't have those rights? So there's this list of our rights as American citizens in the Bill of Rights. And then there's the list of human rights listed in the Universal Declaration. You get more if you have kids? Does that make sense to you? All adults have the same rights unless you have children. Cool, then I get more rights. What about grandparents? Are there any grandparents here? I'm kind of guessing there's a lot of arms being raised. I'm going to talk about a case in just a second that pits grandparents' rights against parents' rights. And it's the most important Supreme Court case that establishes parents' rights. So, does it make sense? The word parent and child never occurs anywhere in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or the Declaration of Independence. Chief Justice Antonin Scalia pointed this out in one of the cases I'm going to talk about. He was a literalist, so he said, you know, if you want to talk about parents' rights, you're going to have to write an amendment to the Constitution, which has been proposed every Congress for the last 8 Congresses, last 16 years. But like the right to privacy and abortion rights, the Supreme Court has recognized parental rights as constitutional because of the 14th Amendment. They're usually called liberty interest. They don't want to use the word rights necessarily. But in these cases that establish this, there was some dispute even among some of the conservative justices. Let me talk about two cases. The first one is 1972, Wisconsin versus Yoder. An Amish farmer wants to pull his son out of school at age 15, saying that, look, I need him on the farm. He's Amish. He's going to be a farmer. He can read and write. That's all he needs. Violates Wisconsin law. So the Amish farmer, I think, must have had more education because he knew enough to sue then at that point. The case goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, yeah, the father has the right to do that. Calls it a culture right, which is a little fuzzy. But nobody asked, well, what about this 15-year-old son? Does anyone ask him if he wants to be a farmer? What if he wants to be a physicist? You know, or anything, a professor, a lawyer, a doctor. You can't get there with the, with an education that goes through sophomore year in high school. So granting the parent this right completely closed the door on the child's choice. I don't know if you want to call it a right yet to make that decision. Then there's a more famous one that really establishes the rights of parents called Troxel versus Granville. It's in 2000. Interesting case because the father of two children and the husband of his wife commits suicide. His widow does not want his parents, the children's grandparents, fraternal grandparents, to visit the children more than maybe once a month for an hour or so. So the grandparents sue the mother to get more visitation rights. And the Supreme Court decides in favor of the mother, saying that the parent does have the right to make this decision, even though it recognizes that there's probably harm coming to the child because they've lost contact or going to lose contact with their grandparents. So these two cases pretty much establish the idea of parental rights. So I'm not going to say they don't exist, but think about it. Do parents have the right to decide what to feed their kids, how to educate their kids, what healthcare, what vaccines to provide for their kids, because they have that right? Or is it because the children have the human right to food, the human right to education, as Malala would say, and the human right to healthcare? Where's the right here? I have a hard time believing that these are parents' rights. Betsy DeVos always conflated the right to education with the right for parents to choose what kind of education their kids get. To me, it has to be the child who has the right here, because a right is an absolute claim, and a parent cannot decide not to feed their child, cannot decide not to educate their child, cannot decide to withhold medicine or healthcare from their child. And how do I know that? Because they'd be arrested if they did that. So it can't be that the parent has the right here. It's the child that has the right. And there's some kind of sort of proxy, guardianship role that the parent plays. The court preferred to call that the rights of parents. We can come back to this, but it seems to me that that is the persistent challenge to children's rights today. So what is it about the definition of human beings as being endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, as Jefferson said, that makes it obvious that they do not apply to children? What's the special ingredient that we have that entitles us to rights? Anybody have a thought on that? What is it that we have that grants us rights and not animals, not trees?
Language.
Language, okay. Although somehow dogs seem to communicate to each other what it is that they need done. Bees can really convey tremendous amount of directions and so forth when they go back to the hive and do their little dance about where the honey is, where the flowers are they just found. I don't know if other animals can't communicate. They don't speak English, certainly. Even our parakeet doesn't speak English, although we try. Language, pardon, anything else? Sentience. Sentience means you can feel pain. Can animals feel pain? Yeah. I don't think it's sentience because you can make a pretty good case that there are other creatures that are sentient, have feeling. In the 18th and 17th century, the argument usually was, and this is Jefferson speaking and Tom Paine in Washington, as well as John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, Englishmen who really started the natural rights theory. Reason. Human beings have rationality. They have reason. And I don't want to get into what reason means. It has something to do with ability to abstract, to imagine yourself in places you're not in, like the future or the past or somebody else's shoes. But usually what they meant by this is saying it's through reason that human beings can determine the difference between right and wrong, between moral right and wrong. And therefore, they should be, Immanuel Kant said, autonomous, morally autonomous to make and obey their own rules. That meant, first of all, human beings had the right to be free. This is where this starts, right? The 18th, 17th century. Every person has the right to be free. Every person is equal because I don't really need some aristocrat to tell me what's right and wrong. I can decide that myself. In fact, I don't even need the Roman Catholic hierarchy to tell me what's right and wrong. I can read the Bible myself and determine that. So the idea of rights comes from this idea that human beings have the capacity, the rational capacity to make decisions for themselves and also to establish government. So this is where in our founding documents, we say things like all men who are created equal. Now, the world has come to accept slowly that indeed women and non-white men also have reason and therefore deserve rights. It wasn't automatic by far, in our country's history, but apparently not children. So what does that mean? It either means that children really don't have reason until reaching some magical age and not really human before that age, or that reason is not the foundation of rights. It has to be, and the proof is that it leaves children out. Even though everyone kind of agrees that they're human beings, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here, but everybody sort of thinks children are human beings, but not fully because they don't have rights. So my argument is the second idea, that there has to be a different reason. And I'm going to make a three-part argument here about what is special about human beings that we get rights. Includes language, by the way. It begins with Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century, who said, what sets us apart as a species is that, we are capable of achieving amazing things like, architecture and discovery and everything that we think of in society. Oh, sorry. Human right to water, I've also written on, so I don't want to violate anybody's right to water. I know. So Hobbes says what makes human beings different is that they can do these things together on the basis of mutual promises. If you want to think of them as contracts, he also calls them contracts all the time. Human beings have this unique capacity to make mutual promises in order to get things done, to work together. And he says that's really what defines the species. So that if that's what defines our species, our ability to make promises to each other, we have to have the right to do that. That's just a logical conclusion. And he's going to say, from that, he's going to say, and the first promise, the first contract we make is a social contract that produces government, and that's a whole different talk. But basically, he says, that's what's special about us. I like to say, we are a very promising species. Maybe this is what Jefferson meant too when he said, that we're created by God with certain inalienable rights. Jefferson never really invoked the name of God unless he was really struggling to make an argument. And to say that we're made in God's image isn't really that revealing it. I've asked people what that means to them, and they usually describe themselves, and I always end up thinking, wow, too bad for God. This really kind of diminishes God to say that. But Christians and Jews know that the God of Genesis is making promises all the time to humans, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Noah. Jesus makes promises to his disciples. And even as a kid, I thought, why do that? I mean, why should God bind himself to promises made to a completely inferior species? I mean, I make my dog promises too, but I don't really feel that bound by them. If something comes up and I can't take her for a walk in the next hour, I don't worry about it. Maybe this is what it means to be godly, to make promises. And so that when we do that, and Hobbes doesn't say this, but maybe when we do that, we're being sort of godly, or at least we're sort of acting in a way that God acts. In any case, basing rights on this capacity to make promises indicates that the thing that gives us rights is not what we do by ourselves, it's what we do together. I like to say that rights don't come that much from within us, like from reason or something. They arise from between us. Rights are very social things. You only have rights in social situations. Robinson Crusoe alone on his desert island can have a lot of complaints, but he doesn't really have any claims to make his rights. There's nobody there to make them to. Rights require other people to have duties. And so I think it's important to see this. And it was also the old debate about human rights. Are they foundational? Are they come from within us, or are they socially constructed? Well, the answer is both. We have the special innate ability to make promises, and we exercise that. And from the exercise come rights that we all have. Now, before we move on to the second idea, this is really important here. I think children know what promising means, don't they? From a very early age, they know what a promise is. If you've been a parent, your kid could barely speak before he or she was saying, "You promised," right? They know what promises mean, and they know why it's important to keep them and why breaking them is wrong. I think that's a pretty good argument, at least an initial argument. So the first part of why children have rights is because they know what promises are and can make them and keep them. Secondly, Hobbes said that as a species, we're also uniquely vulnerable. When practicing the very one thing that makes us special, where's the vulnerability come in a contract or a mutual promise? This always stumped my classes, by the way. And we don't have time to really play a game here, but this is Contracts 101 in law school. Every contract is unequal, every single one. Why? Because one person has to act first. And that person, when that person completes her part of the contract, then she's vulnerable to the other person doing his part, doing what he contracted to do. And Hobbes says, because human beings can't read each other's minds, it's really hard to make promises then, because we're relying on other people that we make them with to do their part. That's why he says the first right that we have is to establish government. What's the purpose of government? To enforce contracts. That's what makes this all so logical. Now, vulnerability to harms, as I said early on, is what rights are for, to protect us from harms. Here too, I think we'd have to say that of all human beings, children are the most vulnerable. So if vulnerability is one of the motivations for rights, it seems like their rights are the most important ones. Martha Nussbaum, a famous philosopher today, says that children are vulnerable not just because they're weak or small or dependent. That's true for a lot of adults too. I've shrunk an inch in the past year, according to my doctor. I don't know where that came from. What's unique about children's vulnerability is they have no political power to offset it or to overcome it. They don't, like Hobbes's adults do, and adults in this country, have the power to establish or participate in government. They're very vulnerable and they're very dependent and they have no recourse. So it's no wonder that democratic governments pay so little attention to what specifically harms children. There's no political price to pay for that. In the United States, that price or that attention is transferred to the parents or to the guardians, but it doesn't necessarily have political impact. This is the foundation of the argument that if children really do have rights, they have to include rights to political power. In other words, citizenship rights to vote in a democracy. Now, the CRC does give children the right to participate, it says, in all decisions affecting the child. It doesn't say the right to vote. It says the right to participate about schools, religion, everything. And it adds the right of participation to the two other rights that we would all say children have, the right to be protected and the right to be provided for. The CRC explicitly says that children have the right to participate in decisions that affect their lives, but it doesn't say what participation means. The funny thing about the CRC, it was written without any input from children whatsoever. You would think that when they were writing that clause about children's right to participate, someone should have said, wait a minute, shouldn't we get some in here then and see what they have to say? But they didn't. In most countries, democratic or not, children remain without any real political clout. Some countries have experimented with child congresses and things like that. But Germany discussed giving 15-year-old children the right to vote a few years ago, but voted it down. And certainly, we understand the vulnerability of children in the political sense in the past year. That so many decisions were made about children in the past year without much input from any of those children that I could tell. The third basis of children's rights lies in the fact that they have a certain group status. And this groupness, like other groups, can impact how they are treated. So group rights is a fairly new concept. Black Lives Matter is a group rights claim. Yes, that there's this group of Black people and their lives matter. Now, it's not saying all lives matter because the specific claim here is that no one has to say that non-Black lives matter. Everybody assumes non-Black lives matter. We want you to believe that Black lives matter too. Now, whether we agree that no one respects Black lives or not is a different question, but that's the claim, that there's a group characteristic that either in the eyes of members of the group defines who they are, or more commonly in the 20th century, a group characteristic that in the eyes of people outside the group defines who they are. And that usually results in rights violations up to and including genocide is the famous example here, right? So the right not to be a victim of genocide is a group right. Do you ever wonder why we had to invent that term? Winston Churchill says in 1943, he says in public, the Nazis appear to be committing a crime for which there is no name. Is that true? Isn't what the Nazis did was commit 6 million individual acts of murder? They did that. Why do we need a special word now for that characterizes it as something different? Because it's the attempted annihilation, not just of individual people, but of a group as that group, right? Once you accept the idea of genocide as a real phenomenon, as a crime, you've pretty much accepted the idea of group rights, that, a group of people has the shared right not to be victim of genocide. Now, no group alive, I would argue, is more visibly and immediately recognizable as a group than our children. As an example, I'm going to use the example that my previous book was based on, environmental rights, which I'm very happy to say 2 weeks ago were officially recognized by the UN, by the Human Rights Council and High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, as human right, as an official human right, the right to a safe environment, to a clean environment. I define it as clean air, water, and soil. It's a big deal. So I would say that children, let me say 4 things about environmental rights and say why they are a good example of children having them. First of all, environmental rights, I argue in this other book, belong first to future generations. That sounds a little odd. But the right to a safe environment first is owned by future generations. Why? Because that's where the harm is. We live with the risk of bad air. Future generations will live with the actual bad air. They will be harmed on a daily basis because of our environmental predation. So all rights are future-oriented. Things are all sort of guarantees or promises themselves. But environmental rights specifically apply to future generations first, because that's where the harm is. I don't think we'd want to say that we have a right to a life without risk. First of all, it's a capitalist country. We tend to embrace risk. It's part of our culture. But even if we didn't, it's a hard sell. But they belong to children first, environmental rights. Why? Children are the first living future generation. They are the first future generation. They're the living future generation. Here's another point. This always gets to me. What are we doing here? Children are already being harmed, not just subjected to risk, by environmental hazards. The UN Special Rapporteur for Toxic Waste announced 6 years ago, I think it was, in these words: children are already being born pre-polluted. In other words, children today are born with environmental toxins already in their body that they absorbed while in their mother's uterus. Isn't that terrifying? Isn't that a horrible thing to realize? So not only are they future generations, but they're already being harmed by from the moment they're born. A Netherlands study in 2016 also estimated that 3.5 children die every year because of environmental related diseases, respiratory infections, malaria, dysentery, so forth. 3.5 million children. What did I say? 3.5 children. Yeah. Actually, that is what it says here. I think that's wrong though. But 3.5 million children every year. I guess we have to laugh at that. So there's a whole wave of child human rights activists acting in the world today, proclaiming, suing for their environmental human rights. I'm going to give you a few examples and we're going to just get to a conclusion. In the United States, there's a famous law case that was just settled last year at the Federal Appeals Court called Juliana versus the United States. It was filed in 2015 by 21 children, ranging in age from 8 to 19. They sued the government for violating their right to life by continuing reliance on fossil fuels. Now, twice, the government appealed to the Supreme Court for an opinion to throw it out. And the Supreme Court twice said, no, this is a real case and it's got to be played out. So they finally did lose last year at the appellate level in a 2-to-1 vote among the 3 federal judges. But the dissent in that case is generally regarded to being one of the most brilliant dissents written in the last 100 years by a woman named Judge Stanton. And it's already formed the basis of several more lawsuits in this country and around the world along the same lines. And then there's environmental rights activist Greta Thunberg. She addressed the UN's climate summit at age 15 a few years ago. She'd started her public work many years before that. She won Times Person of the Year in 2019. You may remember the president ridiculed her for not smiling enough. In Colombia in 2018, 25 appellants ranging in age from 7 to 26 sued the government for Amazon deforestation, and they won. In India in 2017, a 9-year-old girl named Ridhima Pandey filed a petition charging the Indian government with failure to implement emission standards to mitigate climate change. She won. In 2016, Pakistani Rabab Ali, age 7, filed a climate change petition with the Pakistani Supreme Court. Hasn't been decided yet. We could add more. Malala, who I mentioned before, was 8 years old when she started her activism for education rights for children. She won the Nobel Prize at 17. Couldn't vote yet, won the Nobel Prize. David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez, remember from Parkland High School in Florida, started a national movement to restrict guns when they were only 17. The point I'm trying to make here is that it is truly a new age of human rights activism. These are children. They really believe it. And you know what? They are so much more savvy than we are. I mean, these are children who are interconnected globally through social media and the creation rise of a whole lot of child rights-based NGOs. They are really making a global movement that is picking up steam. Now, for many reasons, environmental rights for me are the paradigm of all rights. They're relational, they protect us from harm, they're collective, and they most clearly, I think, belong with priority to children first. Children are the ones who are being harmed by environmental hazards. Even before they're born, they're being harmed. And of course, they will live the longest with all those damages that we do. So what I want to suggest by way of conclusion is that formally acknowledging the human rights of children and giving them the democratic power to claim them through voting rights will change human rights forever. It will change everything. Not only in our arguments about where rights come from, and it will change democracy too, I think, fundamentally. Let me close with just a few thoughts on these things. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. Children's human rights and citizenship rights and the effect on democracy. Let's start there. There's a political theorist at Cambridge University in England named David Runciman, who reminds us that democracy is sort of middle-aged at this point and showing some of its years. It's arguably not expanding globally as it was throughout the 20th century. It's in fact being challenged in several countries, including Hungary, Turkey, Poland, and some might add the United States. I think enfranchising children will rejuvenate democracy and help it recover its sort of youthful energy. Runciman points out that every time a democracy expands its voting pool, gives voting rights to a new group, there's always a sort of period of excitement and renewed participation with women in this country, well, actually with freed slaves in this country, Black men, then women, then teenagers age 18 to 21. That has always been the case. There's been this period of civic renewal as every society, any society that does this, works hard to educate new voters on the blessings and responsibilities of voting. And probably the people doing that educating, including parents, are going to say, yeah, come to think of it, maybe I should do it too. You know, maybe I should take voting more seriously too. It's easy to say children are incapable of voting. And most of those arguments are the same arguments made about women voting and about Blacks voting and about teenagers voting. I would say the arguments were false and prejudiced then. And I think they are still, if we apply them to children. I don't want to get into details about voter registration, all that stuff, because a lot of things would have to change. This country, you can ask about this in the Q&A. You might find it interesting that this country is one of 5 countries in the world that it makes it uniquely difficult to register to vote, that all burden is on the potential voter. Many other countries, you're born, you're registered to vote. You sign up for national health care, you're registered to vote. We make it quite difficult in this country. Some individual states, like Michigan, by the way, have taken steps to make it easier. Other states, like Washington, make it really easy. But then there are some states in the past year that are trying to make it even harder than it was before. And it's beginning to look a little bit like Jim Crow out there. Anyway, there's 5 states. It's us, 5 countries, us, South Africa, Mexico, Burundi. I forget the last one. It's not a group that you're really proud to be part of, frankly, when it comes to democracy. What age? What age should children be before they vote? Runciman says 6, when they're old enough to read. John Wall of Rutgers has an interesting argument here. He says, children should have the right to vote from birth, but it should be exercised in a proxy fashion by their parents until they're ready. And he basically says ready is when they start demanding the right to vote themselves, which could be any age. It seems to me the exact age isn't really the point. What is the point is that without the power to influence or elect public officials, there's little reason for those in office to take the best interests of children seriously. Give them enough food. Give them good education. I mean, this country invented public education. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson. You know, why do we not see it as the right of the child? Giving children the vote will be the first step to take to end child slavery, poverty, hunger, poor education, et cetera. I just don't think democracy can afford not to do this any longer. I think that democracy in this country and throughout the world needs some rejuvenation, and this is a good step to take. The last point I'll make is that giving children human rights will really change the face of what human rights mean. There's a Yale historian who I know a little bit, you may have heard of, named Sam Moyne. And he's written several books critical of the human rights movement and human rights law. His last one is a good title. It's just called Not Enough. Subtitle is Human Rights in an Unequal World. And this argument is not the usual, I think, sort of absurdist argument against human rights. It's very similar to, look, all the money we spent on cancer, and cancer still exists. What a waste. People are saying, look, we've been protecting human rights for 30 years now, and there's still human rights violations. Obviously, it's not working. Moyne's argument is more serious because it comes from within human rights. He says, human rights successes have been many in the past. He only counts 25 years. In terms of political and legal rights, in terms of movement towards democracy, rights of persons, all the steps we've taken to stop torture and trafficking and so forth. But he says, because the focus has only been on that, human rights is complicit in creating what Moyne calls our age of inequality. Most human rights advocates and lawmakers, theorists, see social and economic rights as somehow secondary. Yeah, I mean, people have the right to vote and they have the right not to be tortured, but you know, economic equality, that's something a long way off. And so he says that the past 25 years, and this is borne out statistically, that have shown some of the greatest successes in human rights have also witnessed the greatest growth in inequality, not just in this country where it has really shown up, but everywhere throughout the world. I simply want to end this by suggesting that social and economic rights, right to a safe environment, right to education, right to healthcare, a healthy standard of living, a sustainable income, these are the human rights of children. These are what children need more than anything else. I mean, I've argued for political rights, but these are what the things that children need. If we make children's rights real, they automatically take priority. They would be the first generation rights, not the sort of secondary ones. In other words, beginning with the human rights of children is how we begin to address and fix, ameliorate, the vast economic and social inequality that characterizes today both the world and the United States as well. It's the difference between, not between the have and the have-nots, Moyne says, but between the haves and the have-mores. Interesting. I believe that recognizing the human rights of children is the first priority of those who seek or want a better, more egalitarian, more equal world, is how we can arrive there, how we can arrive at that new and better place. A child, perhaps named Malala, or Greta, or Redeema, or Rabab, or David, or Emma, can show us the way. Thank you. All right, there's 35 minutes or so left. Have at me.
Rich, I do have one question in the chat.
Okay.
And then I'll turn it over to Carol Crawford for questions in the classroom. And just remember to repeat them. You've been doing a good job of that.
I don't think we need
The
that.
person comments, an interesting question. When does a person become a child? At birth or conception? Do unborn children have any rights?
That's an unrelated question, I think. I know people want to turn questions like this into questions about abortion. I don't think there's any difference between that question and children's human rights and that question and just human rights for adults. When children are human is when they have human rights. For me, I'm talking about children who are in the world, live in the world today. I don't think we could give fetuses civil rights anyway, voting rights. I don't mean to make light of it, but that's just a question I don't deal with in the book. It's not a question that's a human rights question particularly. It's an American political question.
Thank you.
And I'll repeat your question. So, keep it.
The question of how young can a child be for
Right.
what age does a child begin to think or opposed to inheriting the parents' prejudice, views the child determine the age when the child turns up.
So the question that Milt's asking is, at what age can a child really be an independent thinker and can be trusted to make a decision that isn't just colored by their parents' prejudices? I hope that our 27-year-old son still carries a lot of the ideas that we taught him. I just don't call them prejudices, but maybe they are. I mean, it's an interesting question. I just don't think it's the important question. I mean, Malala was 8. Redeema was 9. Greta Thunberg was 9. She was 15 when she addressed the UN, for goodness sakes. I don't think there is an age. When I was 10, I grew up to be a political scientist, so I'm already weird. But when I was 10, I stayed up all night with my father in Chicago, watching the election returns roll in the 1960 election. And it was exciting. I knew as much about what was happening in this election than most of the parents or the friends that I knew. I was 10. Okay. Maybe I was unusual because I was very interested politically. I don't think that there is a particular age. I think there's plenty of 25-year-olds who don't care about civic duty. There are plenty of 50-year-olds who don't. I mean, a lot of the things that we say about children, I think, apply to many adults who do vote, or maybe who could vote but don't vote. I don't think it's an age thing. I kind of like John Wall's proposal for that reason. When a child says, look, I'm interested in this now, I'm 12 or I'm 8 or whatever age it is, I've been reading, I've been paying attention, I want to vote now. I want my vote back, Mom. You can't have it anymore. I'm going to do it. And I kind of like that idea. I think 6 is probably too young, just because I'm prejudiced, I guess. I think 18 is way too old. I mean, I could give you stories and stories and stories like I did about child activists all over the world who are making a difference. And they're certainly wired in enough and clued in enough to vote, more so than a lot of voters I know. I don't think there is a particular age. I kind of like the idea of children, making a claim that they want to vote. And when that happens, it's time. Yeah. I think the question is, should there be an age for voting like there is for drinking or driving and things like that? And, you know, I can sort of see the legitimacy of those in some cases. You know, everybody knows there are kids who grow up on farms that are driving a tractor and then the pickup truck by the time they're 12. It's a physical thing. Are you physically able to do it? I think. Drinking age sounds more important to me, I guess. I don't think you should be able to drink and vote. I guess, or drink and drive or drink and vote. I don't think there's a magical age for most of these things, to be honest. There are plenty of people who drive, do other things when they're very young. There are plenty of people who drink way too much and in a very irresponsible way when they're 40. I don't think it's about the age particularly, unless there are physical things that do intervene. Alcohol surely affects a child's body more than it does an adult body, and faster, I would assume. So there might be some physical things like that we need to take account of. But beyond that, I just think that we're hung up on these idea that there's an age of reason. And before that time, you're just an irrational, emotional puddle. And you can't vote yet. You can't drive yet. You can't do all kinds of things yet because you just haven't reached that age of reason. That's where the prejudice is, I think, that it goes back to the 18th century.
I think that parental influence has something to do with determining it, like your father, he let you stay up
Mhm.
10 years old, but he recognized your interest. And I think that there is some justice having the parents make some decisions when you're reasonable.
Yeah.
If they give you that right to do it, they raised you, they still brought you into this earth. Some parents are wonderful about giving their children many opportunities, which makes that peaceful. There's something to say with age as far as what the parents see and how much they've developed.
So the point that's being made here is that there are plenty of areas where what parents provide is very significant in terms of assistance, in terms of advice, in terms of education, moral education, that we don't want to just rule out. And the Supreme Court agrees with you. The Supreme Court gives parents rights. I still think that they are the rights of children, that their parents are educating their children how to exercise. You know, and this is, if you want to be treated as an adult, I mean, what child hasn't heard this? You want to be treated like an adult, act like one, right? So of course, parents have that really important nurturing function. I really don't think that giving children human rights or citizenship rights will end that. There are people who disagree with me. There's a whole very big nationwide movement in this country for a parents' rights amendment. And if that ever gets passed, then that will be a huge source of ammunition for why you can't have the car tonight. You know, you can't do this because I said so, and I'm your parent, and I have the right to tell you that. There's a reason why that amendment hasn't been passed, I think, because the other side of this coin is fairly scary too.
Rich,
Yes.
need a break. I do have 2 questions in the chat, but it looks like you might have another question on deck there.
I think that was, why don't you give me one?
Okay, there's 2 questions. One is, can a child become emancipated from their parent in Michigan? If so, at what age?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
I'll Google it while we're talking and I'll ask the next question.
It might be something like 15 or 16. I mean, if you're at the point that you're allowed to join the army, go into the army, things like that, that's sort of an unofficial age of consent or age of reason. It's no longer 18, it's younger in most states. Another way to ask that question, by the way, is how old do children have to be to marry? And in Michigan, it's quite young. In some states, it's as young as 6. And children are married in this country at the age of 6 or 8. That's not a very well-known fact about the law in this country. I don't want to impugn any particular states. I know that there's some Western states, some Southern states. Michigan is a pretty early marriage state too, although I don't know what the specific age is. But that is, you know, if you're old enough to get married, should you be old enough to vote? Question.
Okay, this, I did find an answer to that on Google. If you want me to share it, I will.
Sure, as long as
Um,
it doesn't say I'm wrong.
well, yeah, you know what, Kim had walked in, so I'm not even gonna know whether that is true or not. Michigan's legal age law states that a 14-year-old may file a lawsuit while a child 16 or older may be emancipated by judicial order.
Okay. In some states with marriages too, there has to be a court order in order to allow someone under a particular age to get married. And some states, those are easy to get, other states they're not.
Okay. And
Thank
this
you.
question was, how are children's human rights related to age of consent?
Well, they're quite related in the sense that in many countries like the United States, the age of consent is 18, and that's when the rights of children, now adults, are recognized. Not really before that time. The age of consent is a kind of squishy concept, or we say it. It's a legal term that how old do you have to be to sign a contract? How old do you have to be to sign a paper officially saying that you're going to enter the armed services, things like that. And that varies from state to state. It doesn't vary from state to state that children do not have citizenship rights. And I would argue that in this country, like every country in the world, children are oppressed at all ages, certainly up until the age of 16, 17. No?
When was the International Charter ratified? What the UN, right?
What charter? You talking about the convention on the rights of the child? It was written in 1999. It was immediately ratified by 120 states within the next year. Signatories through the UN, yeah. UN members, which is pretty much every country in the world. Oh, the first year, many of them did, but over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, it really didn't take very long. And Bill Clinton was president when he signed it. So that was the mid-1990s. He signed it. But in this country, and it's really true for a lot of countries, it's not really law of the land unless it's ratified in this country by the Senate. So there's different ways to talk about UN conventions or treaties. When were they written? When were they received? When were they signed? And when were they ratified? The thing that matters is the ratification one. It's never gone to the Senate, no. No. Because President Obama said he was going to send it to the Senate for ratification, and he never did. And I don't know all the politics of that. It's a real political move. There's a similar one in the Reagan administration with the Genocide Convention. We were the only country who hadn't signed the Genocide Convention. Shit, what? And the reason he signed it's an interesting political story. He went to Germany and sort of like JFK did to sort of embrace the German people and forgive them for the war. And he went to a cemetery in Bitburg and laid a wreath at a German soldier's grave. And then it turned out the next day that there were SS officials buried in that cemetery. So it became this huge cause célèbre. And poor Reagan couldn't get credit for any of this stuff that he was doing. So somebody suggested, I know, let's sign the Genocide Convention. That looks good. So he did that. It was ratified. He sent it to the Senate to be ratified, and the Senate ratified it, but for purely domestic political reasons. This is what I meant when I said, Trump could have done that too for the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I wouldn't have cared what his motivations were, frankly. It would still be ratified. That would matter a lot, because then there are things that cannot happen in this country legally that are happening in this country legally. Because once a treaty or a convention is ratified, it becomes the law of the land. Not just a politically good idea. That's what that process means. So it would be important.
So is it dead?
In this country, I don't see any hope for it in this country. And part of the reason is, as you know, as the sole remaining superpower, more or less, we always have a problem with giving up our sovereignty, you know, by signing on to some international document. We did sign the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because Eleanor Roosevelt basically wrote it. So that would have been really bad politics not to ratify that. And there's been some others, but the United States is a country that has ratified human rights treaties and conventions than almost any other. And mostly it's for that reason, sovereignty reasons. I think most of the pressure in this country is in the other direction. It's for ratifying parents' rights or somehow legally establishing parents' rights, which most child rights advocates see as the opposite, not necessarily the opposite, but it will certainly foreclose the kind of respect for children's rights that I'm talking about. I'm sorry? Right. Just a public school? Okay, so the question is, okay, so the question is that, the statement is that there's a former teacher in the room here who said that on the annual meetings, IEP meetings, where parents would meet with teachers to discuss the plan for the year for their students, the academic plan, this teacher encouraged children to come as well, and a lot of resistance from parents in that. The parents did not want the children there. That doesn't really surprise me, frankly. I think it's important to recognize two things here. Like I said before, the United States invented public education. It's one of the greatest things the United States ever gave to the world, public education, because it meant equal education. I mean, everybody would be educated, and giving everybody free education through high school is the reason that we led the world in just about every economic, industrial, technological measure for at least 100 years. I agree with President Obama that we need to up that a little bit now. The rest of the world has caught up and maybe surpassed us in terms of what kids learn by the time they're 18. So that's why the proposal for free junior college has been placed a few times, which President Trump also supported. First of all, we need to say that this is one of the great American gifts to the world, public education. But public education is not, the purposes of public education really have very little to do with parents. The purpose of public education is to educate children to make a better society. And that is exactly what Jefferson said when he first came up with the idea of the University of Virginia and the model that it should be for the whole country. He said, a democratic society needs educated citizens. All their citizens need to be educated. And equal people need to have equal education, or they'll never be equal. And they won't be free either, because they won't know what options are out there, how many choices there are. So education, free public education, is what liberty and equality require. There's nothing in there about parents. There's a quotation I have, it's an epigraph at the beginning of a chapter, I forget which chapter it is, that says that children do not belong to their parents or even to society. They only belong to their own future liberty. That's kind of abstract. But I think that what the person who said that was trying to say is that children have to arrive at an age of consent or adulthood or choice, whatever you want to call it, having been aware of all the choices that are available. And it's a dilemma, right? Because it's very important that parents help their children learn things. But in opening all those doors, it's important not to close any of them. There's a very famous discussion by a philosopher I talk about in a book called The Right to an Open Future. Children should have the right to an open future. And what he means by that is that nothing can happen to a child as a child that just automatically closes doors. And I keep thinking of the Wisconsin versus Yoder case that I mentioned briefly before. You take a child out of school at age 15 and say you're never going back, that pretty much closes a lot of doors for that child. I mean, you can say, well, you know, when his dad dies, he can go back to school. Yeah, that's pretty tough. Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a perfect example of parental rights that were out of control with this young woman.
Yeah, Carol's making the point of the book called Educated, which is an astonishingly good book about a young girl who's completely repressed by her parents in almost an enslavement kind of way, and rises above it, has a PhD from Cambridge or Oxford or someplace. But it was a real struggle, and it was against most of the things that her parents said to her. I really don't want to post children against parents. I don't want to do that. But unfortunately, it will, if you want to make a case for parental rights, that is going to close the door. By what most people mean by parental rights is for parents to make decisions for their children in all sorts of areas. Some of those areas are completely legitimate. Some of them are not. You know, how do you draw that line? Yeah. So the point that's being making is that parental rights are really entering the political realm very strongly. I personally am encouraged by that, to tell you the truth. I think that it's good to have these things put on the table. Parents do a lot of work in supporting their child's education. I mean, of course they do. And they do have some rights. The Supreme Court says they have rights there. Don't really want to challenge that. They do, but only to a certain extent. And to determine curriculum, I can say it. I'm not running for governor of Virginia, who should not have said this. Parents don't have the right to dictate to schools what should be taught. I think that that's true. The purpose of public education is to educate the child to make a better society.
But by whose standard?
The public standards, which are parents have input into. That's true. And a lot of that's being worked out now, right? Very contentious school board meetings. I think it's probably not fair to hold up certain things in critical race theory. I do know what it is. I've taught it for 30 years. It's mostly teaching about Black history, that racism isn't just a matter of how people feel about other people. Racism is about how does law and institutions affect the victims of racism in this society. Well, slavery was a law. It certainly was racist. Jim Crow is a set of laws, institutions, they're racist. Redlining in real estate, that was law. I mean, it's not that scary a thing to talk about, to look at the institutions and legal practices and laws of society to see if there is racial effects there, because we have a history of doing that. And so do other countries. So we're being critical about it. Now we're going to critically examine it and see where it takes us. I think it's, and then this woman raised this ad about Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is one of the great novels, I think, of our time. It won the Pulitzer Prize and she won the Nobel Prize. And part of the story is the horrible things that were done to female slaves. Those things happened. And then it turned out that this poor boy who was so damaged by this is now a 27-year-old lawyer for the Republican National Committee. I mean, yeah, these things tend to get out of hand very quickly. And then it's too easy to dismiss them, right? Because it just looks like a whole lot of hypocrisy. I don't believe that. I think that parents and children need to be consulted and both participate in the process of education. Parents are demanding more of a role. I'm perfectly open to that. Children should have a role too. And they never have a role. Not even at the Convention on the Rights of the Child didn't give them a role. Sort of interesting. Sometimes this has curious opposite effects. There was a conference a few years ago about child labor around the world, which you all think is just a horrible thing. I do mostly, forced labor, children. Some children came to the conference. I forget what country it was in. And they were aged from 10 to 15. And they made a case. They appeared before the panel and said, look, we work instead of going to school. Our schools are terrible. We learn a lot more working and we make money doing it. So if you're denying us the opportunity to choose work, you're violating our rights, our human rights. So what came of this was the next year's conference did not invite any children to come. No one was allowed to come, you know. So even in the human rights world, these kind of things happen. Yeah, Bill?
Talking about hypocrisy, I remember
Nope, our time is up. Oh.
when Errol and I were in London years ago, 1966. We went to see Twitch, Oliver, based on.
Yeah. Right. Great movie too.
I remember we had the last seat in the upper balcony, a wooden bench. I think we paid 56 cents to watch the show. During intermission,
Oh no.
all these Brits were having tea and crumpets. And then we're watching the story about this wretched life of Twist.
There's a recollection here about some people in the audience going to see Oliver in England some years ago. And the story of Oliver is, of course, a story of child abuse and child deprivation. And during the intermission, all the audience members were having tea and crumpets outside. That seemed pretty hypocritical. Well, I thought you were going to say the children were forced to serve them tea and crumpets. That would be much worse, I would guess. You know, I think Oliver, that story is an important story. One of the chapters begins with the epigraph from Oliver Twist just saying, more, please. And, you know, but no longer ask. Now we start demanding more, please. Things might be changing. I was interested to see that, what's his name? Vance, C.D. Vance? C.D. Vance, who's the author of a very fine book called Hillbilly Elegy. It's an autobiography about him growing up in Appalachia and making it through law school. And he's running for senator. And he made an argument recently for giving children the vote, because in his view, Republicans and conservatives have many more children than Democrats or liberals. So it would mean there could be a real voting blocker. This is when you'd start worrying about, you know, children voting the prejudices of their parents. That's not a good reason to give children the vote, I don't think. Somebody asked me, won't this just mean that people are going to have more children so they get more votes? I said, yeah, maybe, great, that's wonderful. This country, like some other countries, is at a negative population growth rate or very close to it. I think we could, once we get things more egalitarian in this country by giving children human rights, we could probably afford to feed and house and educate a lot more children than we are now. So that's not really an argument against it. Anybody have any questions about how you would register children to vote? It would require a little bit of bureaucracy changing and sharing.
I feel in order for you to vote, you should have to apply yourself, not give it to everyone. You have to go to show that you're interested and capable of doing that.
So someone in the room is saying, in order to vote, you should be required to apply yourself, just to show, to spend a little effort. And I would agree with you, except that that doesn't sound like the nature of a right. I mean, the rights that we get in the Bill of Rights, we don't have to go claim somewhere. We just have them. Human rights are rights we have because we're human, not because we've worked hard to claim them. We're human and we have them.
But we have the right to go and apply.
Yeah, you do.
Right now,
There are many ways in which it's more difficult to vote in this country than it is in other countries. Other countries, it's either done on a weekend or it's a national holiday. Other countries make it easier
but
to
that has
register.
nothing to do with you voting yourself.
It might, if you work at a job that requires you to work for 10 to 12 hours a day, you might not be able to get to a voting place. You might just be too exhausted to get to a voting place. I hear what you're saying. I personally think that voting should be required. I think there should be a fine if you don't vote. Some countries have that, Australia, Belgium, I think, not China, right? Just other democratic countries require this. It's not a huge fine, but it's, it's a dinner. So I think if we made it easier to vote, more people would vote. I don't think that you should be required to show that you're serious by standing in line for 10 hours to vote. That happens in many states in this country, almost always in the poor Black sections of town. People wait for 8, 10, 12 hours to vote. So they're really serious, I guess. The rest of us who just walk into a polling place, we got it way too easy. We should have to wait too, if those people have to wait. I mean, it seems to me if you start multiplying these requirements on voting, you get to a point where you can justify real inequities like that. I just saw an interview with a woman, someone said just this morning on the news that as far as Democrats are concerned, they owe a huge debt to Black women voters in this country who roll out consistently more than any other group of Democratic voters. If you're a Democrat, you like this, and they'll wait in line for 10 hours to vote. Most non-Black women voters wouldn't put up with that. They do. So, I mean, making it hard would show that people are serious about it. It's a dangerous door to open, it seems to me, because then you can place all kinds of requirements like poll taxes and literacy tests and things like that. And those things have been tried. It seems to me that a right means it's a right. You don't have to apply for it. You don't have to prove anything to have it. It's a right. You're a human being. You have the right. Well, you can be pretty close to the right to leave at this point. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Carol, are you going to close the class or shall I do that?
Go ahead, Susan. Everybody can see you. We can hear you.
She's Oz.
Yes. And we're not able to see you, Carol, but I'll just say from the people at home, thank you so much. We appreciate your contribution. That was a wonderful class. And Carol, if you can just stand somewhat close to him so that your voice is picked up on his mic.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. I think this was very stimulating.
My pleasure. Thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you. It's available at fine bookstores everywhere. It's just,
Thank you.
Yale University Press, right?
Thanks.
Oxford.
Okay, everybody have a wonderful day. I'm going to close the class.